Good afternoon. This is Critical Talk with Professor Al-Deen, and I have some news that I would like to share before our program begins. Uh, as with the governor, starting August 10th, renters will be able to apply for grants of up to $5,000 each to cover rent. Starting August 24th, homeowners can apply for up to $15,000 mortgage relief grants from the Illinois Housing Development Authority. The $150 million excuse me, emergency rental assistance program is expected to help about 30,000 people. Please get in there. It's ihda.org. Thank you. This evening's program is a continuation of a bit of a training about uh, uh, what do we want to call it? All of the things that have to do with inclusion, things that have to do with equity, things that have to do with our implicit biases. With Dr. Harry Lewis, who is the founder of Connoisseur Development. As you know from last night, she works in a variety of venues, but I want to make sure we get the most of her time tonight. And so I'm going to welcome Dr. Lewis and have her just do a little bit of a recap from last night.
Thank you so much, Dr. Al-Deen. Again, it's my honor and pleasure to be here with you in this space, speaking about something that's very important in this time, in this country, and with our relationships with our neighbors and our colleagues and our coworkers and our friends and everyone that we come in contact with. I don't see the screen up. There we go. Okay, wonderful. So yeah, last night we were talking about equity and Renaissance development. This is an area that we focus on as it relates to corporate social responsibility, and we provide diversity, equity, and inclusion training for groups, for corporations, for small groups, and we can provide them for massage and other places. And so we're talking about equity, and as many people know, equity is defined as just and fair inclusion into a society in which all people, immaterial of their race or ethnicity, can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. However, that's still elusive for many people because we said that, diversity, equity, inclusion. Oftentimes our companies and organizations get to diversity and inclusion. We've hired some Muslims, we've hired, some African Americans and some folks from Latinx community, but we don't get to the equity. And so when we think about equity, Renaissance development, we define equity, or we utilize this acrostic for equity: economics, quantitative, qualitative, uniformity, inclusive, transparent, and youth. And we utilize this acrostic as a way of thinking and talking about equity, and as far as how we should be doing equity. It's more of we're utilizing equity acrostic as an action word. And let me see here. I think I need to change over a little bit here. All right, so the first word I'm just going to go there. So we went through economics, and economics is everything. So when we're thinking about equity, we must think about money, because we can't change and move the needle forward for families in order to further equity unless we're furthering salaries, and unless we're furthering opportunities. And all of those opportunities are created as a result of economics and people receiving more opportunities to generate wealth. The second word or words in our acrostic is quantitative, qualitative, meaning research, meaning collecting data. It's difficult and really impossible to understand the gaps in equity, and if we're making any movement towards greater equity, unless we're measuring and unless we're collecting the data, the quantitative and the qualitative data, to understanding where there are gaps in healthcare, and income and housing and education and other social and economic factors. The third word in our acrostic is uniformity. That's the word that we use to reflect fair and just society. And in this slide, last night we talked about it's difficult when we're talking about specifically racial equity. You can't talk about furthering equity without talking about justice. And at present, we know that justice is not equal. It's not equal in this country because if it were equal, if it was equal, then we wouldn't have the challenges that we have right now in society when you have 1 in 3 Black men have some encounter with the justice system in his lifetime. And so when you have that level of injustice, you have a lot of the disparity as a result of that. And so that speaking about justice specifically is important, and doing things to improve justice in society is necessary to further equity. It has to be front and center. And then the final word that we talked about yesterday was inclusive. And we're talking about, inclusive. Inclusive is a word that we do understand. And sometimes it's challenging to get to inclusive or inclusivity in organizations, on boards, in schools. But basically, we talked about one way of thinking about diversity and inclusion is to think about a dance. And you have a party and you're invited to, so you have this party. And when you're invited to the party, think about that as being diversity. Diversity is when you're invited to the party. Inclusion is when you're being asked to dance. And equity is when you have the ability to pick out the music, when you actually have some level of power and decision making. So we do want diversity, and we know that statistics have shown diversity makes community stronger. It makes organizations stronger because there's a variety of opinions. There's a variety of opportunity to connect to different people and to move organizations further. And also it does generate companies are stronger financially when they do have more diverse staff and they're more inclusive. They create a space of inclusion of ideas and decisions. And it's not so much about diversity that makes us stronger only, but it's about the inclusivity of the people who are involved in that organization. That
Can you
makes
do the dance, the components of the dance one more time?
Okay, slower. Okay, yes, I definitely will. So imagine that you have a dance, and in my mind, I see a disco ball, but imagine that you have a dance, and when you're invited to the dance, as a person being invited to the dance, that is diversity. To be invited to the dance, that is diversity. If you're different than the people who are at the dance. Inclusion is is not only being invited to the dance, but being asked to dance. So now you're being included in that party. And then equity is you have the ability, you're being invited to pick out the music. So you can play the music that you want to listen to. That's equity, that you have that fair and just opportunity, not only to attend the dance, not only to dance to the music that is being played, but also to pick out the music. So that is how we think about diversity, inclusion, and equity. That's a tangible way to think about diversity, inclusion, and equity.
Love it.
Yeah. So today we were going to focus on the last two words in the acrostic. The first being transparent. And much like measurement and collecting data, being transparent. Transparency fosters trust. Too often, communities have been taken advantage of, have been lied to. There's still inequity in pay. African American. We're looking at this chart right here. We see this is a chart of women's annual earning compared to white men, and so you see going all the way to Hispanic women or Latinx women. She makes 58 cents on the dollar to a white man. Black women make 66 cents on the dollar to white men. And so having this data is important, but too often we cite these, the data, and we quote the data, we refer to the data, but we don't do anything. And so the idea is to continuously have this information and to report on the information so that we can continue to address this in our organizations. But this is just one example of transparency. When we're talking about projects as they relate to community development, economic development, or who's building things in communities, and Are the neighbors involved in that process? That do they have any voice in decisions being made? Creating a level of transparency is critical to furthering equity in economic development and education.
Let me ask a question,
Sure.
because I also see this issue when you have things like a board, one or two Black people on an immigrant board or a white board, and all the real meetings happen when those people are not present.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, and even though you may not, those Black people who are on that board, they may not know immediately, but over time, and probably wouldn't even be a long period of time, they will see that decisions are being made when they're not, when they were not present, or the day that they missed a meeting, or there was a separate meeting and decisions were made.
Right.
That's not furthering equity. That will not further equity. I mean, so that board, if they're serious about creating a board that reflects equitable decisions, that fosters inclusion, and that everyone and they're serious about if it's depending on the board, if it's a masajid, you want to make sure that you are reflecting Muslim values. You want to make sure that everyone's voice is included and that you are intentional about breaking down barriers.
Well, that happens when, after a little push, many masajid boards put a woman or two, but then they make all the decisions when they're not present, or they don't listen to them when they are present.
And when it comes to things like that, that's where you're going into things, the conversations around, implicit bias. We say, one of the things we have a workshop, with Connaissance Development, we've been doing these workshops the last couple of weeks, and that's something that we do. We offer workshops for boards, for organizations, corporations, where on a variety of areas of diversity and corporate social responsibility and inclusion. And we have a workshop. It's more like a teaser, provide a general overview of information, with the idea that we would like to go in and have a deeper workshop with an organization. So we have one coming up this Sunday on barriers to equity, implicit bias. And the definition of implicit bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, our actions, our decisions in an unconscious manner. And sometimes people will say, honestly, they will say that women have an equal voice. Women are equal to men. I support women's rights and women's voice and women's agency. But then they will make a decision that says something else. And that's where some researchers, some psychologists believe that's where implicit bias lives, where we can say one thing and honestly believe one thing, but based on all of the information that we received growing up in media, in our community, in our various spaces, we do something different.
Can you go back and tell us about this workshop that you're going to do this weekend?
Sure. This workshop actually is more like a webinar. We've done a workshop where we went into looking at different videos on how implicit bias has played out in different experiences. So we're going to do this webinar. We'll focus on that. We'll focus on looking at how the various areas of inequity in society. So we're looking at housing, we're looking at education, we're looking at the criminal justice system, and how people make decisions or actions as a result of the possibility of their implicit bias. Now, the idea of implicit bias is controversial. It is something that we're talking about right now, and you hear a lot about in the media because many people believe that they're not racist, or they don't have prejudice, racist attitudes and things like that. But yet they're still, hiring people that look more like them, or they're still paying women paying less. Yes.
Where can I sign up?
And if you Right now it's posted on Eventbrite. If you look up Connaissance Development on Eventbrite, but if you go to our website about an hour after the show, I will have a link on the website on the landing page, and you'll be able to sign up on our landing page at connaissancedevelopment.com for the webinar this Sunday.
Okay, now spell it.
Connaissance Development, that is www.KON as in Nancy, E as in egg, S as in Sam, E as in egg, N as in Nancy, S as in Sam, development, connaissancedevelopment.com.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to take about a 30-second break now, and we'll be right back.
Open up your eyes.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
It's Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
We are back, I think. I think that this is so important for any time people, different genders, different ethnicities, different religions sit in the same place. We have to learn and be eager about learning how to make the people that come feel welcome, make sure that we actually hear their voices. So let's keep going.
Okay. And so then the final word in the acrostic, which I think is as important as the first word in our acrostic. Again, this is an acrostic that Connaissance Development created as a framework to talk about equity, and how we should be thinking about equity, and how we should be thinking about how we do equity, how we create more equitable systems within our organizations and within our masajid and other spaces of influence. And so as important as economics is youth. And the reason why we chose the word youth, meaning when we're developing a more equitable space, we need to be thinking about the future. We need to be thinking about sustainable equity, not equity just for a day, not equity just, for the cameras for now, not equity because we are being reviewed by our government board and we needed to show some level of diversity and some reduction in pay gaps. But no, true equity that lasts, for generations. And so one way of achieving greater equity is investing in youth. Investing in youth furthers equity. And, we hear about the disparities in the educational system. One part of town, the schools are better, the teachers are paid more, the kids have higher test scores. And we know that a lot of it is driven by property taxes. And we see here on average in poor non-white school districts receive 19%, or about, in this example, $2,600 less per student than affluent white school districts. And that $2,600 less in funding per student affects the quality of the education, quality of the teachers. It affects the quality of the food in the schools. It affects the quality of the textbooks. It affects technology. Not all, when COVID hit, many schools, the students were not prepared to work remotely. Not all schools provide laptops or Chromebooks for each and every student after the third grade, until they graduate. And so when you have school districts that don't provide Chromebooks for the students, and the kids don't have Wi-Fi at home, you find an increased disparity in education for kids in households during this time of COVID. And so things like that, just again, $2,600 less per student affects a lot when it comes to furthering equity. And that's just one example. So, in other areas of that affect youth, education is one. The quality of food I was talking about, and again, the investment in youth is also tied to the investment in other resources that impact that child or that family's livelihood, whether it's investment in the stores in their community and the quality of the food, if they have quality food or fresh produce in their communities, or the quality of the healthcare that affects the young person's ability to take care of ailments as they occur. So we can talk about the various ways in which young people are impacted if we don't invest. And so one of the things that I had talked about yesterday as it related to youth, and it's something that is not in this slide, but I'm going to mention it quickly. And it's going back to the slide on that was reflected uniformity, we're talking about just, and we're talking about that 1 in 3 Black men have an encounter with the justice system in their lifetime. And there's something that I mentioned last night, and many of your viewers may be familiar with it, or maybe it was a new term that they heard last night, and it's the school to prison pipeline. And the school to prison pipeline is something that affects kids of color, and particularly Black kids, more so than other kids. And it's when we're not investing in our youth by educating our teachers and educating our administrators, providing implicit bias training or diversity training or other types of resources so that they're not making these decisions as it relates to young people. And when I say school to prison pipeline, I'm referring to young people, and this has been studied in different school districts around the country, where young people, or Black children, males and females, are sent to the principal's office more often than the white counterparts for the same issues. They're sent more often.
Don't you think that perhaps when we got away from teachers living in the communities where they teach, that had an exponential effect?
Yeah, absolutely. What living in the community, reflecting the community, having a connection to the community, valuing the young people, knowing, that I know Johnny, I see Johnny's family, I know I see Johnny at the store. Yeah, absolutely. I think that has some effect on that. But I also think it's the investment in the schools, the investment in the resources and educating the teachers. I think having teachers that are part of the community is definitely important because they understand the community, they understand the challenges of the community. They're vested in the community. It's not just I work in this particular neighborhood, but this is my neighborhood.
Right.
And I want the best for my neighbors, and I want the best for that kid who I see every day, when I walk my dog and I see his mom and his dad and everyone else, and I want the best for that family.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree to a point. I believe that teachers in the community is one thing, but also more resources in the community, more technology in the community, more investment, and that investment has to be a decision where we have to look at shifting resources, and we have to be transparent about shifting resources as well.
If we have, like what happened here in Chicago, the school system made an effort, didn't think it through. Everybody got to have a tablet. Well, if you don't have Wi-Fi, what good is a tablet going to do you? If the family can't eat, then the tablet winds up in a pawn shop. So there seems to be something that resources have to sit inside.
Yeah, that's true. And we have to think about all aspects of the resources. We have to think about, again, we're talking about creating equity. It's not just going to happen overnight. It's a process. It's going to take it's not going to take, it will take as long as it takes for us to wrap our head and our resources around. These are the things that we need to do. We need to not do them in piecemeal. We need to not have a 2-year plan or an investment here, but we need to have an overhaul on a lot of areas. And so, yeah, I think when we're talking about investing in that, going with the example that you gave as far as, family, if they need to pawn the computer because they don't have enough resources, they don't have enough food. I mean, so these are other areas of inequity that the community needs to be addressing. That's where that teacher, if he or she lived in the neighborhood, will understand that family better. But again, I think that it's really about understanding, the community and understanding what the community needs. I don't think that, these things should be done in a vacuum.
Exactly. Because if you put
wraparound
teachers
service
and principals and administrators in a community, they become anchors economically for the community and will demand some services that may not be present, know how to contact aldermen, et cetera, that families who are fighting that round robin of eviction and poor living conditions and food deserts and poor health can't fight alone.
Right. I agree. No, it has to be, getting to equity and really creating a space and opportunity for people who've been disenfranchised for decades. It's going to take, a major shift. It's going to take a seismic shift in order to move people's lives towards equity. I think sometimes we get stuck in the idea, and this is my opinion, we get stuck in the idea that it's someone else's problem, that they'll figure it out for themselves. And it's true. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. I think it has to be a both and solution. Yes, we have to take care of our own. We have to, identify ways in which we can work together as a community and create avenues and pathways towards entrepreneurship and towards increasing relationships within our community to further livelihoods. But at the same time, it requires also external support and external shifts in resources. And I think we have to get to a point in society where we realize that we don't have to hoard all of the resources in one area, that we can just, and I'm not talking about some different type of political ideology or different type of political system. I'm just talking about making sure that the resources are shared in a way where people can still grow and develop and have profits, but where they can also further uh, further people's lives. And I'm gonna stop right there. I can go on and in a particular direction, but the reality is there are enough resources, I believe, for everyone, and it's a matter of thinking about them differently. And it doesn't have to take a long time. Sometimes I talk about the period of Reconstruction after the period of enslavement, and there was a period for 10 years where investment, it wasn't perfect, but there was an investment in economic development. There was an investment in education and in healthcare. And some communities, some Black communities around the country began to flourish. And then that was also the time period when the Ku Klux Klan was established. And those towns and cities that were adjacent to poorer white communities were burned to the ground. And then the president shift and those resources ended. And that was the period right after people being enslaved. And then we had these decades of Jim Crow laws and all of those things subsequent after that. So these ideas, it's not, sometimes people feel that it's going to take, another century or 300 years. No, it doesn't need to take that long. We just need to commit to the change. We're in a space right now where people are wanting to do something. People are,
Yes.
people are wanting to do something, but they don't know how to. But it's not impossible. We just need to move in that direction. We need to move in that direction and start thinking about our resources differently and how we connect to people differently, how we see our existence, our growth is definitely dependent on your existence and your growth. And so we just need to move in that direction.
Okay, we're going to take another break. And when we come back, I want to discuss how do we use those resources differently than the other 50 times that we've messed them up.
Open up your eyes.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
It's Adam's world. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah, let's explore.
We are back now, and I just want to remind everybody that you're hearing this fascinating conversation on diversity and inclusion and equity on Muslim Network TV. We will survive by your contributions your comments. You're joining us. Get with it. Now, back to this pertinent question.
So, I'm going.
Go ahead.
So that was a tough question. I wasn't prepared for that question tonight, but I've come up with 5 points. I've come up with 5 points, and there are probably more. So how do we do things differently and not waste money as we have over the decades? That's summarizing pretty much what you said.
Yeah.
So my 5 points are, we include everyone in the decision-making process. It's not just a few people over here saying that this is how we're going to deviate the resources, this is where we're going to invest. But if we're going to invest in a community and we're going to say that this particular neighborhood needs investment, or this particular neighborhood needs a school or a hospital or affordable housing, that it's not done in a vacuum, that it's done in a way that includes the people who live there, who have ownership in that process in order to support its success. And so that's one thing.
Wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But back to your slide on economics. If you're living in apartments, you don't have an understanding of your tax dollars doing X, Y, and Z. That comes with ownership, right?
It comes with ownership, but everyone who's living in an apartment building, there are many people who live in apartment buildings who do not have ownership, who are quite educated. So I think it's also about including people in the process.
Education, it's ownership, it is a familiarity with the system.
Yes, and I think, again, that's a process of bringing people along. I don't believe that everyone, again, and you agree with me as well, who rents does not understand the system and does not understand how things work. They just haven't had the opportunity to accumulate wealth, and they've been in the system that's led them to a pathway to debt, or just to a pathway to where they can't generate wealth. That the statistic is, on average, the average African American family has accumulated wealth of $17,000, and compared to an average white family of $117,000.
But I just read, well, not just, but I read an article where there was a pilot program done, and I'm thinking it was Louisiana, I'm not remembering, where people, women primarily, were given, all of them on welfare, were given $1,000 a month. All the people that signed up for this program, that was the caveat. But to get the $1,000 a month, you had to get off welfare and trust that people could guide you, not abruptly, so to speak. Then the next thing that happened was when the people heard that they were not just going to get an extra $1,000 a month, many dropped out. Then people realized that these folks had no sense of saving. None had bank accounts. None knew how to shop for the best nutritional food at prices where they could stretch that food dollar longer. Another Black woman stepped in, and she put a program to teach them financial literacy, along with some other things. But she asked the question, why are you buying your children new clothes at top dollar? And she said, because the woman said, because the people will see them and think I can't afford stuff. That's a mindset. It's not that you're not generating some money, but if you don't know how to manage what you have, which is more than many people around the globe are given.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I agree with that to a certain point. Again, I think that African Americans, Black folks start at a deficit. So their management of income for some people is a challenge. but I don't believe there's a challenge for everyone. And also it's a challenge in lack of resources, lack of opportunity, and systems of oppression that exist that create challenges for the family. And you brought up your example actually touched on my points 2, 3, and 4, because I was going to say the next 3 areas are investing in women, investing in education, and investing in entrepreneurship. And so again, investing in educational programs for women, both women and men, but definitely investing in women. Women have, statistically shown have been able to manage resources. Not to say that men can't, but statistically shown to be able to manage resources and stretch the dollar a little bit further. I don't want to go down the gender line. I don't like to go down that gender line, but investing in women, and then also investing in entrepreneurship. And sometimes
investing in a family.
Yeah, women have statistically shown that she will spend money, her last dime, on her family before spending it outside of the family. And so, so investing in women and educating women on how to, for those women who struggle in that area, even though she's starting off, with a shorter stick or shorter opportunity, educating her on how to manage the limited resources that she has, and then also having her to think, for those who can, depending on the resources, to think outside of just, if there's an opportunity to be an entrepreneur, to build businesses within the neighborhoods, within the systems, within the communities, because there's been so much disinvestment in many of these communities and lack of resources. There again, my 2, 3, and 4. The 4 would be investing in entrepreneurs to bring life back into these disinvested communities. I think in one of my workshops, I had this, I like to throw out this dream of taking, of billionaires investing, $500,000 or so much, $50,000 or $500,000 into a particular community, and every family gets this. And what does that look like? If so much money was invested in a neighborhood where houses were paid for, education was paid for the kids, and if people were given seed money to start businesses in that community, what kind of transformation could occur if people actually had resources to transform their neighborhood, like real resources?
Well, whoa. If you're gonna give me every damn thing, then I don't have any incentive to do for self.
This is the conversation we had before. I think, I had a conversation with you.
I am not a proponent of welfare forever. Somebody else taking their hard-earned money and investing in me, and there be no conversation about return.
I agree. I don't believe in long-term welfare. I definitely believe in investing in self, but I also believe that people need an opportunity. Part of the lack of generational wealth is because people did not have any opportunity. People didn't have a house that was fully paid for, passed down to them, to whereas they could have, taken a home equity loan to start a business and then build from there. That resource didn't exist, and so an opportunity to have some seed money to start a business, or some seed money, or a scholarship that pays for my son's education, so that he's not worrying about student loans when he gets out of college, and then he has seed money to start a business in the neighborhood.
But why don't the rubric used to be get a scholarship?
There are
if you have to take out a bunch of loans to go to school, then it might be that you work while going to school, like many in the Black community have for generations. You appreciate the education more. But I don't get this. Somebody has to pay for me, or oh my God, I can't work and go to college.
I agree with you.
Where are these notions? I'm gonna jump from poor to upper middle class overnight?
Yes. I didn't say poor to upper class, but definitely one can go from poor to middle class overnight. I don't think it has to be a 3-generation process. I think it just needs to be some shifting in wealth, some intentional shifting in wealth, and education that goes along with it, and investment. And then the last point in that question, that was a brilliant question to talk about today. The economic development piece is investing in communities and incentivizing investment in communities, because we're talking about communities that have been disenfranchised for decades, and crime and lack of resources and old buildings and things like that. You have to incentivize with transparency, with community oversight of the development, so to ensure that it benefits the community and that the community is involved. And I think that there's some, but there's not enough. There's not enough of intentional, concentrated investment in communities in order to transform them.
But the Amish get out and build their own houses.
It's fine to build
buildings. What happened to transferring skills?
I agree with that, but the Amish are in smaller communities. We're talking about inner cities, urban areas around the country. I mean, there was a time, again, we can talk about post-Reconstruction. The population of African Americans was smaller. This was also pre-industrial era. So now we're in communities, where there are hundreds of thousands of people in neighborhoods where there's, massive disinvestment. And so even though you may have a family or a network of people who can do for self, who can grow food, who have skills to transfer to other people, the disinvestment and the damage, the generational damage that has occurred, we have to do more. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do for self, but I don't think that we have to exclusively do for self. That I've never been the type of person to think that it has to be either or. I think that we have to have a both and comprehensive solution that addresses all areas of inequities. And we need to be intentional about it.
I kind of get it. I'm thinking of the model of the nation where do for self was the motto, and they didn't look for anybody outside to till the land, to grow the soil. They did collectives, which bought the property. They passed down skills. And I don't know that living in this polarized world, anybody wants to give up their money again. When I think of all the money that's been thrown into, I forget the name of the section of town, black sections of town, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. The community still looks the same.
Because it wasn't, the money wasn't transparent. There were people who were only in it to receive the benefits, the tax benefits. The community was not involved in the development. There weren't any jobs created. There weren't any entrepreneurs created. That's what I'm talking about. And the investment was not inequitable. It was not with a vision of equity. It was not with a vision of changing the system so that we can create, we can improve livelihoods, whereas we can create a balance of equity. And so I think that you can still have investment, but you have to shift the way we go into it.
I agree.
That's it. Yeah.
So how are we, in every poor community, people get targeted. Ministers, imams, thought leaders get targeted. And they become the, I don't want to say doer-ins, but doer-ins of the community. Because when they finish pocketing all the money, there's nothing left for the community.
What do you mean by that? Could you say that again?
In talking with people, I'm not from Chicago, but in talking with people around Chicago and Philadelphia and Milwaukee, the ministers, the imams, who else is there? Political leaders get richer. The communities stay the same.
Yeah, that's because people and elected officials are investing into saviors. And again, we need to get beyond that. We need to invest in the community. We need to invest in the people, and we need to create a coalition of multiple people in that neighborhood, not just that quote unquote leader in that community. And that's, again, has been a historical problem, especially when it's come to the Black community. And I think we just need to do our development differently right now. And I think we're in a space right now that when we have the opportunity to create opportunities for investment, we cannot make sure that we cannot specifically support this particular community development initiative that's run by this particular organization or this particular church or this particular mosque. It has to be something that's spread out throughout the community with different leadership, with different partners working towards the same
Right.
goal.
That sounds more doable, and hopefully we will get some other models, because I think one thing that is left out is that there are many, many more poor white people than there are black people.
Well, there are statistically, yes.
They're sometimes getting the other balance of that equity, but still living in trailers, still homeless, etc. We're screaming for somebody to do for us. But the model you're talking about is one where not only are we meeting you halfway, we're asking for something. We want to be held accountable for it. And we're going to show you a product.
Yeah, I'm calling for a partnership. I don't think we've done economic development historically as a partnership between the community and the investors. And I think that that's the direction that we need to move in as far as this, if we want transformational change across the country in urban areas.
Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to go back to was entrepreneurship. The pandemic shut down many entrepreneurial opportunities. Many people, not many, but you know what I mean, a significant number of people went into debt because they tried to do all kinds of entrepreneurial things, working from home, buying stalls in large buildings. They tried to be entrepreneurial and got kicked.
Yeah, during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
still
because there weren't any other opportunities. You had to do what you could because we're in this space. Yeah, entrepreneurism, it's risky,
yeah,
but also it can be rewarding.
yeah.
We were talking about doing for self. I mean, everything that we do is a risk, and we just, again, the most successful entrepreneurs, the most successful businesses, you start, you fail, you start again.
Yeah.
And we
If
just have
you
to continue to
survive.
support each other in that second chance.
If you survive. Let me
If you
give
survive.
you the last 2 minutes to tell us everything you need for us to know, because I'm coming on Sunday.
Okay. Well, thank you again for this opportunity of being on the show again to talk about equity and to talk about Connaissance development. So as far as participating on the webinar, participating in the webinar, viewing the webinar, it will be on Sunday at 2 p.m. If you go to Connaissance development, the Eventbrite link will be there within the hour. Check back in an hour and I'll definitely have it up there. And this particular topic will be on barriers to equity, implicit bias. And so we'll focus on looking at the concept of implicit bias and how does implicit bias show up in the various areas of inequity.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm glad to be in this space, and I hope to be able to connect with some of your listeners at in their organizations, at the Masajid, in their companies, in order to further equity and inclusion in those spaces.
This is Critical Talk with Professor Al-Deen. I just spent an hour with the fabulous Harriet Lewis, and we've talked about diversity, equity, and some things she didn't want to talk about, but I'll see you next time.